Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of Books and Bytes. Today, we're diving deep into this book. That has been like a guiding light for thinkers and leaders for centuries. The Enchiridion by Epictetus.
It's fascinating how this book, written almost 2,000 years ago, still resonates with modern readers. It's a manual for navigating life's ups and downs with grace and resilience.
Yeah. And what's really cool is that it's not some long, dense philosophical treatise. The Enchiridion is super concise and practical. It's like Epictetus distilled the essence of Stoic wisdom into this little handbook for living a better life.
Exactly. It's a collection of precepts, almost like bite-sized pieces of wisdom that you can reflect on and apply to your own life.
Okay, so for someone who might be new to Stoicism, what's the big idea here? What's the core message of the Enchiridion?
Well, if you boil it down, the Enchiridion is all about this fundamental distinction between what we can and cannot control. Epictetus argues that. We have complete control over our thoughts, our judgments, our desires, and our actions. But things like our body, our possessions, our reputation, and external events, those are ultimately outside our control.
That's a pretty powerful concept. But how does that actually play out in everyday life? How can we use that idea to navigate the challenges we all face?
That's where the brilliance of the Enchiridion comes in. It doesn't just lay out these philosophical principles. It gives you concrete strategies for applying them to your own life. It's packed with advice on how to handle everything, from disappointment and grief to dealing with difficult people and making tough decisions.
All right, so let's dive into the book itself. Starting from the beginning, what are some of the key themes that emerge right away?
One of the first things Epictetus emphasizes is the importance of understanding the nature of things. He talks about how we often mistake things that are not within our power for things that are, for example. We might get attached to a certain outcome, like getting a promotion or winning a competition. And then we suffer when things don't go our way.
So he's saying that a lot of our suffering comes from this misperception of control, from trying to control things that are ultimately outside of our power.
Exactly. And he goes on to say that if we can learn to focus our energy on the things we can control, our own thoughts, our judgments, our actions, then we can find true freedom and happiness.
That makes a lot of sense. It's about shifting our focus from what's happening to us to how we're responding to it. And there's that famous quote from the book, right? Something about men being disturbed, not by things, but by the views they take of things.
You got it. That's from chapter 5. And it's one of the most powerful ideas in the entire book. Epictetus is basically saying that it's not the events themselves that cause us suffering, but our interpretations of those events. We have the power to choose how we view things, how we frame our experiences.
Okay, so how does he suggest we go about changing our perspective? Does he give us any practical tools for doing that?
Absolutely. Throughout the Enchiridion, Epictetus offers a variety of techniques for reframing our thoughts and managing our emotions. One of his key strategies is to focus on what's in our control. He says that instead of dwelling on the past or worrying about the future, we should focus our attention on the present moment and on what we can do right now.
This whole living in the present thing, that's something I really struggle with. But hearing it framed this way in the Enchiridion makes it click for me. It's not about ignoring our problems or pretending everything is perfect. It's about choosing where we direct our energy.
Precisely. And that's a key point. Stoicism isn't about suppressing our emotions or becoming some kind of emotionless robot. It's about acknowledging our emotions, understanding them, and then choosing how we respond to them.
Almost like, we can't always control what happens to us, but we can choose how we react to it, how we let it affect us.
Exactly. And Epictetus gives us some really helpful tools for doing that. For example, he talks about the importance of recognizing the impermanence of things. Everything is constantly changing. Nothing lasts forever. So instead of clinging to things and getting upset when they change or disappear, we can appreciate them for what they are in this moment and then let them go when it's time.
Wow. That's really profound. It's like he's saying, hey, you're going to lose everything eventually, so enjoy it while you have it, and don't let the fear of loss control your life.
Right. He also talks about practicing negative visualization, which might sound a little counterintuitive, but it's actually a really powerful technique.
Okay. What is negative visualization? That sounds kind of intense.
Basically, it involves imagining the worst-case scenario. So let's say you're really attached to your car. Epictetus would suggest you spend some time visualizing your car getting stolen or totaled in an accident.
Wait, is he seriously saying we should imagine all these terrible things happening?
He is. But there's a really good reason for it. By contemplating these potential losses, we can start to loosen our grip on those attachments and appreciate what we have even more. It's like a mental exercise to prepare ourselves for the inevitable ups and downs of life.
So it's about taking the sting out of potential loss by mentally preparing ourselves for it ahead of time. It's pretty brilliant, actually, like a form of emotional resilience training.
Exactly, and it helps us to shift our perspective from scarcity to gratitude. Instead of focusing on what we might lose, we can start to appreciate what we have right now.
That's a really powerful shift in thinking. So instead of being afraid of losing my car, I could choose to be grateful for the freedom and convenience it provides me right now.
Exactly, and by doing that, you're actually increasing your happiness in the present moment, regardless of whether you actually lose your car or not. And that's a key theme in Stoicism, finding happiness and contentment within yourself, rather than relying on external circumstances.
Okay, I'm starting to see how these Stoic principles can really change the way we approach life. But it sounds like it takes a lot of self-awareness and discipline to actually put this stuff into practice.
It definitely does. Epictetus isn't sugarcoating things. He's honest about the challenges of living a Stoic life. He tells us that it requires constant vigilance, self-reflection, and a willingness to challenge our own thoughts and habits.
So it's not like you just read the Enchiridion once and suddenly become a Stoic sage. It's an ongoing practice, a lifelong journey of self-improvement.
Exactly, and that's what makes it so rewarding. It's a process of continually striving to become the best version of yourself.
All right, let's keep going. What are some of the other key themes that emerge in the early parts of the book?
One of the things Epictetus talks about a lot is the importance of aligning our desires with nature. He argues that much of our suffering comes from wanting things that are out of alignment with the natural order of things.
Can you give me an example of what he means by that?
Sure. Imagine you're stuck in traffic. You might get frustrated and angry, wishing you weren't stuck in traffic. But the reality is, traffic is a natural part of life, especially if you live in a city. By resisting that reality, by wishing things were different, you're only creating more suffering for yourself.
So he's saying that instead of fighting against reality, we should try to accept it and work within the constraints of what's possible.
Exactly. And he goes on to say that when we align our desires with nature, when we accept what is, we can find a sense of peace and tranquility that's not dependent on external circumstances.
So it's about finding that inner peace that's not contingent on things going our way all the time. Is there a particular chapter that addresses that idea? I'm ready to dive into more specifics.
Well, that's woven throughout the book. Why don't we pick it up from there after a short break?
Sounds great. We'll be right back with more insights from the Enchiridion.
Picking up where we left off, one chapter that really digs into aligning our desires with nature is chapter 8. It's all about not seeking to have events happen as you want them to, but instead wanting them to happen as they do happen.
Okay, I have to admit that sounds a little backwards at first. How can we want things we don't actually want?
It's about recognizing that. The universe has its own way of unfolding, and resisting that only creates friction and suffering. Epictetus uses the analogy of an archer. A skilled archer aims for the target, but they don't get upset if the wind blows the arrow slightly off course. They adjust their aim and try again.
So it's like we can set our intentions, we can work towards our goals,
Yeah,
but we also need to be flexible and adaptable when things don't go exactly as planned.
exactly. And that's where the Stoic concept of acceptance comes in. It's not about being passive or giving up. It's about recognizing what you can and cannot control, and then focusing your energy on what you can influence.
This is reminding me of something else Epictetus talks about, the importance of distinguishing between what is up to us and what is not up to us.
Right. That's a central theme throughout the Enchiridion. He constantly reminds us to focus on our own thoughts, judgments, and actions, because those are the things we have direct control over, and to let go of trying to control external events, other people's opinions, or anything else that falls outside our sphere of influence.
It's so easy to get caught up in trying to control things we can't, like wanting a certain person to like us or trying to force a particular outcome in a situation.
Absolutely. And that's a recipe for frustration and disappointment, Epictetus would say. Why waste your energy on things you can't control? Focus on what you can influence, your own character, your own responses, your own actions.
Okay, I can see how that makes sense. It's about taking responsibility for our own happiness and well-being, rather than putting that responsibility on external factors.
Precisely. And there's another powerful idea that Epictetus explores in the book, that of living in accordance with nature.
That phrase keeps popping up. What exactly does he mean by that?
He's referring to living in harmony with the rational order of the universe. It's about recognizing that everything has a purpose. even the things that seem bad or unpleasant. He encourages us to see the bigger picture, to trust that things are unfolding as they should, even if we don't fully understand why.
So it's about surrendering to the flow of life rather than resisting it.
In a way, yes. But it's not about being passive or giving up. It's about recognizing that there are forces larger than ourselves at play, and that we can find peace by aligning ourselves with those forces, rather than fighting against them.
That's a really profound idea. It's almost like a spiritual practice in a way. Learning to trust in something bigger than ourselves.
And that's where the connection between Stoicism and modern mindfulness practices becomes really apparent. Epictetus encourages us to pay attention to our thoughts, our emotions, and our reactions without judgment. He talks about observing our internal state with the same detachment that we would observe the weather.
So instead of getting swept away by our emotions, we can learn to simply observe them as they arise and pass away. That's a really helpful technique for dealing with difficult emotions like anger or anxiety.
Absolutely. And it's something we can practice in our everyday lives. The next time you find yourself feeling stressed or overwhelmed, try to take a step back and simply observe those feelings without judgment. Notice the sensations in your body, the thoughts running through your mind, but don't engage with them. Just let them be.
I'm starting to see how these Stoic principles can be so helpful for managing the ups and downs of life. It's about finding that inner strength and resilience to face whatever challenges come our way. But what about those really big challenges, like dealing with loss or grief? Does Epictetus have any advice for navigating those kinds of experiences?
He does, and it's actually quite profound. In chapter 3, he talks about remembering that everything is temporary, that nothing is truly ours to keep. He says, "Never say of anything, 'I have lost it, but I have restored it.'"
Wow, that's a totally different way of looking at loss. It's like he's reframing it as a natural part of the cycle of life,
Yeah.
rather than something to be feared or avoided.
Exactly. And he applies this principle to everything, not just material possessions. He says that even our loved ones are ultimately on loan to us from the universe, and that we should be grateful for the time we have with them, knowing that eventually they will be returned.
That's a beautiful way to think about it. But it must be incredibly difficult to put that into practice when you're actually grieving.
Of course, Stoicism isn't about suppressing our emotions or pretending that we don't feel pain. It's about acknowledging those emotions, allowing ourselves to feel them fully, but not letting them control us.
So it's about finding that balance between feeling our emotions fully and not letting them consume us.
Precisely. It's about finding that inner strength and resilience to keep moving forward, even when things are tough. Epictetus reminds us that we have the power within ourselves to endure and overcome even the most difficult challenges.
It's inspiring to think that even in the face of profound loss, we can choose to find meaning and purpose. And I'm noticing how this concept of choice is a recurring theme throughout the Enchiridion.
Absolutely. Epictetus constantly reminds us that we have the power to choose our thoughts, our attitudes, and our actions, regardless of our circumstances. He emphasizes that true freedom lies in recognizing this power and using it wisely.
It's like he's saying, hey, you can't always control what happens to you, but you can always control how you respond to it.
Exactly. And that's a really empowering message. It reminds us that even in the face of adversity, we still have agency. We still have the power to choose how we experience the world, how we interact with others, and ultimately how we live our lives.
And that brings us to another key theme in the Enchiridion, which is the importance of virtue. Epictetus seems to place a lot of emphasis on living a virtuous life.
He does. For Epictetus, virtue is the ultimate good. It's the foundation of a fulfilling and meaningful life.
What are some of the specific virtues he talks about?
Well, he highlights virtues like wisdom, justice, courage, temperance, and self-control. These are the qualities that enable us to live in accordance with nature, to make wise choices, and to navigate the challenges of life with grace and integrity.
So it's not just about feeling better. It's about becoming a better person.
Exactly. Stoicism is not just about individual happiness. It's about striving to live a life that is aligned with our highest values. It's about becoming the best versions of ourselves, both for our own benefit and for the benefit of those around us.
And I'm noticing that he also talks a lot about the importance of accepting what is, which seems to go hand in hand with the idea of virtue.
You're right. In chapter 8, he says, "Don't seek for everything to happen as you wish it would, but rather wish that everything happens as it actually will. Then your life will flow well."
That's a powerful reminder to let go of our attachments to specific outcomes and to accept the present moment as it is.
Exactly. And he goes on to say that this acceptance Doesn't mean becoming complacent or passive. It's about recognizing that there are things we can change and things we can't, and then focusing our energy on what we can influence, while accepting the things that are outside our control.
It's about recognizing that. Even in the midst of chaos and uncertainty, we can find a sense of peace and stability by focusing on what is truly important.
Precisely, and that's one of the most beautiful and enduring aspects of Stoicism. It offers us a path to inner peace and fulfillment, regardless of our external circumstances.
This is all so insightful, but I have to admit, some of this stuff is really challenging. It's like Epictetus is asking us to completely rewire our thinking, to approach life from a completely different perspective.
He is, and he's very upfront about the fact that this is not an easy path. But he also assures us that it's a path worth taking, that the rewards of living a Stoic life far outweigh the challenges.
So how do we even begin to put these principles into practice? It feels like a pretty daunting task.
Well, Epictetus doesn't leave us hanging. He provides a lot of practical advice and exercises in the Enchiridion to help us cultivate these Stoic virtues and integrate them into our daily lives.
Like what? Give me some examples.
Well, he talks about the importance of self-reflection, of examining our thoughts and beliefs, to see if they're aligned with our values. He also emphasizes the importance of choosing our company wisely, surrounding ourselves with people who uplift and inspire us, rather than those who bring us down.
That makes sense. The people we spend time with have a huge impact on our thoughts, our feelings, and our behaviors.
Exactly. And he also encourages us to practice mindfulness, to pay attention to the present moment, and to appreciate the simple things in life. He reminds us that happiness is not found in external possessions or achievements, but in our internal state of being.
So much of what he's saying resonates. With modern psychology and self-help practices, it's like he was way ahead of his time.
He really was. And that's why the Enchiridion continues to be so relevant today. It offers us timeless wisdom that we can apply to our modern lives, helping us to navigate the challenges of the 21st century with greater peace, resilience, and purpose.
Okay, let's keep going. There's so much more to explore in the Enchiridion. I'm eager to hear what other insights Epictetus has in store for us. As we're going through all these principles, I'm struck by how practical Epictetus is. It's not just airy-fairy philosophy. It's like he's giving us a toolkit for dealing with everyday situations.
He absolutely is, and that's one of the things that makes the Enchiridion so unique. It's not just a collection of abstract ideas, it's a guidebook for living a better life.
So let's talk about some of those practical tools. What kind of advice does Epictetus give us for handling those everyday annoyances, like difficult people or frustrating situations?
Well, remember that core principle of focusing on what's in our control. Epictetus reminds us that we can't control other people's actions or behaviors, but we can control our own reactions.
That's easier said than done. I know I often get caught up in other people's drama or let their bad moods affect me.
It takes practice, for sure, but with awareness and effort, we can train ourselves to respond differently. Epictetus encourages us to take a step back from those situations, to observe them objectively, and to choose a response that aligns with our values and principles.
So instead of getting sucked into that coworker's negativity, I could choose to remain calm and focused on my own work.
Exactly. You always have the power to choose how you engage with any situation. You can choose to let it ruin your day, or you can choose to rise above it and attain your own inner peace.
This is reminding me of that passage where Epictetus says something like, "If you are told that such a one speaks ill of you, do not make excuses about what is said of you, but answer, he does not know my other faults, else he would not have mentioned these only."
That's from chapter 33. And it's a great example of how Epictetus challenges us to detach from our egos. Instead of getting defensive or trying to prove the other person wrong, he suggests we simply acknowledge their limited perspective and move on.
It's like he's saying, their opinion of me is ultimately none of my business.
Exactly. And that's a really liberating realization. It frees us from the need to seek external validation or to control other people's perceptions of us.
And this ties back to that idea of focusing on what's truly important, right? Like living a virtuous life, being a good person, rather than worrying about what other people think.
Exactly. And that's where the true meaning of freedom lies, according to Epictetus. It's not about external circumstances. It's about inner liberation from our attachments, our fears, and our limiting beliefs.
There's so much wisdom packed into this little book. And what's striking me out, as we get towards the end of the Enchiridion, there's this recurring theme of death that keeps popping up.
You're right. And it's not in a morbid or depressing way. Epictetus talks about death in a way that's actually quite liberating.
Yeah, he has that line. about keeping death before your eyes, which sounds a little intense at first.
It might seem that way, but his point is that by reflecting on our mortality, we can gain a greater appreciation for life and a sense of urgency to live it well. It's about making the most of each day, not wasting time on trivial pursuits or getting caught up in things that don't ultimately matter.
So it's not about being afraid of death, but about using the awareness of death
Mm-hmm.
to motivate us to live more fully.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that our time here is precious and choosing to spend it wisely in alignment with our values and purpose.
This has been such an eye-opening deep dive. I feel like the Enchiridion is one of those books
Yeah.
that you can keep coming back to
Yeah.
throughout your life, always finding new layers of meaning and wisdom.
I completely agree. It's a timeless classic that offers profound insights into the human condition and practical guidance for living a better life.
If you had to distill the essence of the Enchiridion
Yeah.
into one key takeaway, what would it be?
For me, it's the power of choice. Epictetus reminds us that even though we can't control everything that happens to us, we always have the power to choose how we respond. We can choose our thoughts, our attitudes, our actions, and ultimately, we can choose the kind of person we want to be.
That's beautifully put. It's like he's giving us back our agency, empowering us to take control of our own lives.
And that's a message that's both timeless and incredibly relevant to our modern lives.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground today. Any final thoughts for our listeners before we wrap up this deep dive into the Enchiridion?
If you're looking for a practical guide to living a better life, a life of greater peace, meaning and purpose, I highly recommend checking out the Enchiridion for yourself. You might be surprised by how much wisdom this ancient text has to offer.
I second that. And remember, Stoicism is not just about reading a book. It's about putting those principles into practice in your daily life. So, if you could choose one principle from the Enchiridion to focus on this week, which would it be and why? That's something for all of you to ponder. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the wisdom of Epictetus. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning,